I have given thousands of speeches, but the beginning of this one is immensely difficult. I am deeply moved, incredibly touched. My apologies. Ladies and gentlemen, today I'm talking to you as a doctor and scientist, but above all as a fellow human. Not exactly as a vaccination opponent, eccentric thinker or corona denier, as some have often wanted to portray me in recent years. I would like to preface today's presentation with a question. Do you know what the average life expectancy of a German citizen was at the beginning of the medical revolution in the 19th century? Yes, 38 years. However, when a person celebrated their 60th birthday at the time, how many years you think he still had ahead of him? The answer is 6 to 7, not that much less than today. How is that explained? At that time, infections were the main cause of illness and deaths, often affecting younger people below 60. The advent of microbiology turned this trend around, and life expectancy doubled. Simultaneously, the undoubted progress in the emerging fields of cardiology, cancer research, and genetic technology did not deliver nearly as much in comparison. How did microbiology achieve this? The majority, especially politicians and the media, will shout, "Of course, it was the vaccinations." However, this is a global misconception that caused the current crisis. Fact is that vaccinations played a much smaller role than other circumstances. Above all, it was the improvements in living conditions and healthy lifestyles that proved crucial for the decline in deadly infections. One thing is certain, however. Vaccinations proved to be the greatest blessing for the money and world elites, the pharmaceutical industry, and for politics. They were able to pursue their own interests under the joint slogan, "Everything for public health, for the well-being of the general public." To achieve this noble goal, the WHO was created. This private organization, not democratically elected by the people, is currently in the process of assuming executive power of attorney over the healthcare system of 190 member states. Germany is one of its greatest sponsors and supporters. In a mere 6 months, on these premises, the German Bundestag will finally vote on whether the WHO will be equipped with such executive powers to call a medical emergency out of the blue that justifies the enforced cancellation of human rights. This also includes the use of new gene-based RNA vaccines. The WHO also announced that these vaccines will be introduced for all injectables, meaning in as many humans and animals as is possible. I wonder why. Money and power, power and money, always the same answer. RNA vaccines are such short-lived copies of chromosomal sequences that control the production of selected antigens, for instance the corona spike protein. RNA vaccines have to be parceled into tiny spheres of fatty acids, so-called lipid nanoparticles, LNPs. The packaging protects the RNA from destruction so that it can get to all organs of the body via the blood circulation. The tiny fatty globules circulate and act like Trojan horses. Cells take them up and its mRNA cargo is released inside, and its sequences control the production of a specific gene product that is then presented for inspection by the immune system. Every single injection delivers over 1 billion RNA copies to the human recipient. The mass production of mRNA requires the mass availability of the DNA templates. How can this be achieved? There are basically 2 ways. First, The 4 DNA lattice nucleic acids are commercially available in large packs today. Linking them in any order is feasible in respective labs by computer-controlled processes. If DNA recipes are known, such as, for example, for the coding of virus spike proteins, they can be designed on paper in gene laboratories and then employed to create any RNA copies. This is how BioNTech's first corona vaccine was created, which was tested by Pfizer in a clinical trial in the summer of 2020 on 20,000 people. 20,000 got it and another 20,000 received a placebo. On the basis of its alleged success, it got an emergency use authorization to be released for its use in Germany and then worldwide. The success of the clinical approval study is a story of large-scale fraud and deception. We have already learned that today. This was the first prank, but the second followed immediately. The biggest fraud of all times. Remember, a few billion artificially lab-generated DNA recipes for vaccination of a mere 20,000 people were feasible for a gene laboratory setting. But to vaccinate billions of people, this was unfeasible and much too expensive. So, the manufacturers had to go back to nature. How so? The trick, the billions and trillions of DNA recipes are no longer done small-scale and computer-controlled in laboratories. They began manufacturing it industrial scale from bacterial mini-chromosomes, the so-called plasmids. Those mini-chromosomes are easy to generate and manipulate. Foreign recipes for sequences, for example the gene for the corona spike protein, can be inserted into these. The bacteria then breed and multiply these DNA plasmids in vast quantities, which are then taken out and used as templates for the production of its mRNA copies. You may shout, "Hang on, this differs from the officially approved procedure." Question: has the use of the bacterial chromosomes for vaccine production ever been checked and approved according to safety standards? The answer to this was recently published by Dr. Jürgen Kirchner, alias David Fischer, and lawyer Dr. Brigitte Röhrig. This is my recommended reading for the day. A resounding no is the answer. They have never, ever been checked, neither for ingredients nor for safety. The respective responsible authorities simply waved them through and approved them. They acted as facilitators and accomplices in the act. But in what?
Die Behörden waren Mitwisser und Mittäter. Wobei
Ladies and gentlemen, at this very moment, one has sufficient reason to become a little suspicious that this entire vaccination campaign may have been and is a gigantic medical crime. And now I will relate the outrageous consequences of such a crime. What everyone needs to know is that the immune system acts like our security forces that keeps watch over and guards to protect every living cell of our body. Everything remains healthy and stable as long as it is in accordance with its natural blueprint of our own unique book of life. But woe when the recipe and instructions come from the pages of a non-self book. Then The security forces, our immune system, attack those cells immediately.
Alles gut.
The ability of the immune system to recognize and destroy any cells that make non-self copies is given at birth and ends with death.
Ganz anders.
Here to the left, we see a cell that produces its own copies. Everything works fine. The product in black is not recognized as foreign by our immune system, and the cells remain intact. But it's quite different on the right, where we see a cell that absorbed injected foreign RNA. This type of mRNA is stealthily packed to reach all living cells of the body. The corresponding cell is now marked for action by the immune system and ultimately sentenced to death. It is something every child should learn at school. Every child should learn that at school. Think of the rejection problem with transplants. You may get my kidney, but my kidney gets marked and destroyed. Non-self is not even tolerated within the same species, the humans. And if after the first failure a new attempt is made, all hell will break loose, with a merciless rejection process to follow, forcefully and destructively. The same principle is at play in increasing intensity in the wake of every single booster RNA injection. Remember, the number of packaged RNA copies that are administered with every injection is gigantic. Countless immune attacks are triggered throughout the body that only come to a standstill when the production of the foreign protein has ended. How long will this take? Just a few days, as the vaccine manufacturers, the vaccine fan club, the politicians, and even the Nobel Prize Committee are not tiring to claim?
Im vergangenen Jahr tauchte ein alarmierender Befund auf.
An unsettling, if not alarming, finding surfaced last year that proved all claims of being safe and effective an outright lie. In many vaccinated people, weeks and even months after the injections, spike proteins and multi-organ infections were found, comprising fully fledged autoimmune reactions. These observations were often associated with severe, if not often fatal diseases. What is the reason for such a catastrophic, long-lasting production of an RNA-encoded protein? The discovery of Kevin McKernan and colleagues from March this year provided frightening data for explanation. When manufacturing a vaccine, the bacterial mini-chromosomes must be removed from the packaging of the mRNA generated. Otherwise, they too will be found inside the same envelope. Here we see the chromosomes to the left and its copies of RNA in the middle. Before this RNA is packaged, the DNA must be removed. This possibility is not a mere triviality, since they may be packed together. Thus we come across mRNA being found packed next to DNA. I think that is not that difficult to understand. And I can imagine that the politicians of other parties will also understand that. McKernan discovered that this crucial step of removing plasmid DNA had not been carried out properly. Huge amounts of plasmid DNA were, of all things, found wrapped up as payloads. This ensured their successful delivery to the living cells. Kevin's discovery has now been confirmed by several other laboratories, also in Germany. Large quantities of DNA contamination have been found in all 27 batches that have so far been examined. The Canadian Medical Authority even confirmed this finding 4 weeks ago. However, the authorities saw no sufficient reason to remove the product from the market. In addition, question to the present audience: did the responsible German authority, the Paul-Ehrlich Institute, from the Federal Ministry of Health, carry out any reliable scientific safety studies? The answer is a resounding no, not to this day. That, ladies and gentlemen, must have legal consequences. This is criminally negligent because the Paul-Ehrlich Institute, like all authorities of the Federal Ministry of Health, is obliged to protect the population from outright health risks. The intake of bacterial chromosomes changes the entirety of DNA instructions to the cell, which is synonymous to a change in the entire genome. Mind you, with every cell division, the protective cover of the cell nucleus dissolves so that foreign DNA can come to rest right next to our chromosomes, which subsequently ends up in the nucleus of any newly formed daughter cells. Thus, an endless production line of external proteins is triggered, which will lead to long-term inflammation and organ damage throughout the body. Such a long-lasting production has already been shown in experiments with cell cultures and in animal experiments. Not to forget, these lipid nanoparticles have been used for over 10 years to ferry foreign DNA into cells in animal experiments. Of course, the Paul-Ehrlich Institute says, but that has not yet been established for people. Nonetheless, continuous production of these can simply have fatal consequences. Vascular walls are being damaged. Bleeding and the formation of blood clots are some of the inevitable consequences. We said all that 3 years ago. 3 years ago. My God! The tissue will die due to lack of oxygen. The heart is an organ that cannot replace dead cells. Who hasn't heard of the mysterious sudden cardiac deaths that occur worldwide? They are only the tip of an iceberg. Heart diseases triggered by vaccinations are now on the agenda of young and old alike. Fortunately, well-known pathologists stood up to honor the reputation of German science and conducted the world's first research into the connection between vaccination and the most devastating organ damage. The work was fronted by the late Professor Arne Burkhardt, who recently suffered a most tragic accident, and his friend Professor Walter Lang, who spoke to you here today, as well as Dr. Michael Moers in Dresden and the world-renowned Professor Peter Schirmacher, director of the Institute of Pathology at Heidelberg University. Through their work, it is now scientifically safe to state that the corona vaccination has the potential to kill. It is literally stated in this internationally well-received and often cited work by Professor Schirmacher. It has been proven without any doubt that the mRNA vaccination can lead to fatal myocarditis. Nobody can come any longer and say that this has not been proven. This team has clearly shown it. The second organ that cannot replace its dead cells is the brain. Depending on where the vaccination damage occurs, it may throw up different neurological and psychiatric diseases, nerve failures and paralysis, but also dementia, psychosis, and personality changes are on the agenda for vaccinated people. The incomprehensible horror story is not over yet. Chopped up tiny DNA fragments have been found abundantly as vaccine contaminations. Fragment-like DNA sequences have an increased tendency to be incorporated into the chromosomal DNA. The possible consequences are endless. The finely coordinated network that controls cell division and differentiation can be profoundly disturbed in train with developing cancer and developmental disorders as its dire consequence. Mutations in sperm and fertilized egg cells could make any of its changed properties inheritable. Ladies and gentlemen, do not believe anything else, because the sober truth is there are no cost-effective procedures for reliable separation of mass-produced RNA from the bacterial chromosomes. Its complete removal would be far too expensive, which is why the bacterial chromosomes have been found in all and every one of the corona vaccine batches that have been examined so far. Please note, contamination with plasmid DNA will be the rule, not the exception, for all RNA vaccines. And further, the difference between this DNA and the DNA that is referred to by the Paul Ehrlich Institute and others, who may talk about supposed acceptable contamination levels, differs fundamentally to the mass-produced wrapped-up DNA which is found in the charges and ready for shipping to the living cell. By the way, this never happens to so-called naked DNA. Bacteria and naked DNA can actually be injected into the intestine and nothing happens, because this DNA is destroyed by the immune system immediately. Ladies and gentlemen, whosoever praises RNA vaccines as safe and effective, who alleges that vaccination would rarely produce serious side effects, is either an incredibly ignorant person or infinitely evil. The perpetrators make themselves criminally liable, together with those that actively or passively operate and advocate this type of vaccination, because today it has been scientifically proven that vaccination can only cause negative things, and that is to a life-threatening extent. And last not least, the positive message. The all-important DNA discovery was only made a few months ago. Before that, nobody could guess that vaccination charges were contaminated with bacterial chromosomes. Just as important, the general public could not have guessed that it had a substance injected that had not been checked at all. Neither effectiveness, nor its safety, nor its contents. Therefore, you can still save yourselves, you doctors and colleagues out there. You can still save yourselves. All were deceived. All were abused. One couldn't guess what and how everything happened at the time. But now that we know there's still a small window of time to return to the path of Hippocrates. Never pick up a gene injection with your hand again unless you are really sure that there's no bacterial DNA in it. And as importantly, put an end to the inhumane
Mit der
WHO.
menschenverachtenden WHO. Im gleichen Kontext.
In the same context, politicians of Germany, across all party lines, you too can save yourselves from the perpetration of major crimes. You could certainly not have known that. You too were deceived and abused. You too can save yourselves and your honor. Pull your head out of this trap as quickly as possible. It may be too late soon, because the world is now slowly understanding the machinations. You will not be able to say that the wake-up call did not reach you. Act now in solidarity with and for the benefit of your people. Decide that no further RNA injections should be administered until all vital open questions have been sufficiently clarified. And, dear politicians, you do realize that every purchase contract that rests on fraud and deception can and must be declared null and void. Request your people's tax money back from the manufacturers of this fraud. And let the ill-gotten billions benefit your people, especially the poorest, having suffered vaccination damage, and their surviving relatives. Dear fellow human beings, the division of our society has created deep scars. Let's humanely find back to each other. Say no to all those who have become puppets of power and money. Say yes to our solidarity, our community, the one that, as in times before, can and must rebuild this country. Let us shake hands with each other and stand together in unity for creating a better future.
Und schreiten wir jetzt als geeinte Nation einer besseren Zukunft entgegen.